When we think of science, we imagine bright laboratories, white coats, and the thrill of discovery. We picture a moment of triumph when someone lifts their head from a microscope and says, "Eureka, we found it." Science is often painted as a beacon of hope, guiding humanity toward progress and healing. But beneath that shining image lies another story. A story that is not told in classrooms or celebrated in textbooks. It is the story of human experimentation. A story where compassion was often silenced and curiosity became something darker. These are not tales of invention. These are tales of betrayal. What you are about to hear is not a simple history lesson. It is a journey into some of the most disturbing chapters of medical research. Moments when human dignity was cast aside and lives were treated as expendable. These events shaped the ethical rules we live by today, and they serve as a chilling reminder of what happens when the pursuit of knowledge forgets the value of human life. Our story begins in Alabama in 1932, at the height of the Great Depression, when poverty weighed heavily on African American communities. The U.S. Public Health Service launched what they called a study of bad blood. Hundreds of poor black men were promised free medical care, meals, and burial insurance. For many, it felt like a lifeline. But behind those promises was a cruel deception. These men were not being treated for anemia or fatigue, as they had been told. They were being studied for something else: syphilis. Doctors wanted to observe the natural course of the disease, which meant that treatment was deliberately withheld. Even when penicillin became the standard cure in the 1940s, the men were left untreated. For decades, they returned to the clinics, trusting the white coats who smiled and spoke of care. But what they received was not healing. It was betrayal. Wives were infected, children were born with the disease, and families suffered in silence. The truth did not emerge until 1972. By then, hundreds had died slow and painful deaths. The outrage that followed shook America. Trust in medical institutions collapsed. But from this darkness came one important change: the National Research Act of 1974. It established the principle of informed consent. Every person has the right to know what is happening to their body. Every person has the right to say no. Tuskegee remains a wound on the conscience of medicine, a reminder that the cost of progress can never be measured in broken lives. While Tuskegee unfolded in the public health system, another nightmare was happening in secret. This time, not in clinics, but in the shadows of the Cold War. It was called Project MKUltra. The CIA believed that if they could control the mind, they could control the future. The idea was simple but terrifying: to create techniques for brainwashing, interrogation, and manipulation that could give America an edge over its enemies. From the 1950s through the 1960s, experiments were carried out on unsuspecting victims. Inmates in prisons, patients in psychiatric hospitals, and even everyday citizens were dosed with LSD without their knowledge. Some were subjected to hypnosis. Others were locked away in sensory deprivation chambers. Minds were broken, paranoia planted, and lives ruined. The subjects had not volunteered. They had not given consent. They were simply used. When the truth about MKUltra came out, the American public was horrified. Trust in government cracked. And once again, protections were strengthened to keep human research from crossing into abuse. MKUltra taught us something chilling. When national security is used as an excuse, morality can disappear almost overnight. But not all horrors came from secret government projects. Some began in classrooms. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo transformed the basement of Stanford University into a mock prison. He recruited college students to play the roles of guards and prisoners. The plan was to study how power changes behavior. At first, it seemed harmless. Students laughed as they were assigned uniforms. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. But within days, it spiraled out of control. The students playing guards became authoritarian, cruel, and abusive. The students playing prisoners fell into despair, humiliation, and emotional breakdown. Zimbardo himself became so caught up in the role of prison superintendent that he failed to see the suffering around him. After only 6 days, the experiment was forced to end. The damage was undeniable. The Stanford Prison Experiment revealed something frightening about human nature. Power can corrupt quickly. Ordinary people can become oppressors when given authority. The aftermath of this experiment forced psychology to adopt stricter ethical oversight. Researchers could no longer push participants into situations that risked their mental health. What began as a simple study became a haunting reminder of how fragile morality can be when power enters the equation. If the Tuskegee study, MKUltra, and Stanford were betrayals, what happened in Japan during World War II was something far darker. In a remote part of Manchuria stood a facility known as Unit 731. Outwardly, it was presented as a research center. In reality, it was a place of nightmares. Led by General Shiro Ishii, Unit 731 carried out biological warfare experiments of unimaginable cruelty. Prisoners of war and civilians alike were used as test subjects. They were exposed to diseases like bubonic plague and cholera. They were frozen alive to study frostbite. Some were subjected to surgery without anesthesia. Others were dissected while still breathing. These atrocities were hidden from the world for decades. When the truth finally emerged, humanity was horrified. The legacy of Unit 731 forced international leaders to act. The Geneva Conventions were strengthened to ensure that war would never again serve as an excuse for crimes against humanity. Unit 731 remains one of the darkest chapters in medical history, proof of how easily science can be twisted into a weapon. Even after the war, unethical experiments continued in places no one would expect. In the 1950s, at the Willowbrook State School in New York, children with intellectual disabilities were placed under the care of doctors who claimed to want to help them. Among those doctors was Saul Krugman, who sought to study hepatitis. His reasoning was cold. Hepatitis was already common in the overcrowded institution, so why not control it? He deliberately infected children with the virus, believing that the research might one day lead to treatments. To him, it was science. To the outside world, it was cruelty. When the truth emerged, the public was furious. Vulnerable children had been turned into test subjects without their consent, their suffering dismissed in the name of research. The outrage led to stronger laws protecting vulnerable groups. Children, the disabled, and those unable to speak for themselves were now shielded by rules that demanded their rights be protected above all else. And then there are the crimes that haunt us still. In Nazi concentration camps, doctors in uniforms carried out experiments that stripped away every trace of humanity. Twins were injected with chemicals. Prisoners were forced into freezing water to test survival. Others were sterilized, mutilated, or killed in the name of racial superiority. The horrors of these camps stunned the world when the war ended. During the Nuremberg trials, these doctors faced justice. And from those trials came something new, the Nuremberg Code. This principle was clear. No human experiment could ever be carried out without voluntary, informed consent. It declared that science is worthless if it destroys the dignity of the people it studies. This code became the cornerstone of modern medical ethics. And even today, it stands as a shield, reminding us that the crimes of the past must never be repeated. From Tuskegee to MKUltra, from Stanford to Willowbrook, from Unit 731 to Nazi Germany, history is filled with stories of science gone wrong. Each one shows us how easily morality can be silenced when curiosity is unchecked. Each one shows us how quickly human beings can be reduced to subjects, numbers, or tools. Yet each tragedy also forced change. The outrage of the public, the demands for justice, and the cries of survivors all led to stronger protections. Today, researchers must abide by strict ethical codes. Every study requires informed consent. Vulnerable groups are protected. And oversight ensures that experiments serve humanity rather than harm it. But the shadow of history lingers. These stories remind us that science is not just about discovery. It is about responsibility. Progress without ethics is not progress at all. The history of human experimentation is not just a list of crimes. It is a warning that curiosity without compassion can destroy lives. A warning that progress without morality is no progress at all. As we continue to search for cures, answers, and breakthroughs, we must remember this. Science must always serve humanity, never the other way around. Because true progress is measured not in what we discover, but in the humanity we refuse to sacrifice along the way.